Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
What paranormal activities have you witnessed? Episode 2. I was awoken one night to a loud crash in my bathroom. I went in and all of the things on my sink top were in the middle of the floor. I mean, about 3 feet away from the sink. Everything. Not just one thing fell over and knocked the other into the sink, but toothbrush, toothpaste, hair gel, face wash, hand soap. All on the floor in the middle of the bathroom. What was even worse is that, between waking up and going to check out the bathroom, as I crossed the landing back to my room I noticed a light had come on downstairs. I went down and both the hall light and living room light were on, except none of the light switches were in the on position. I had to click the switch on, off to make them switch off. I was living on my own at the time and it freaked me out a little bit, but I'm still in the same house and have had no other experiences.
When I saw this thread, I thought about my experience in Turkmenistan for work. I was in the capital of Ashgabat, waiting for my apartment lease to be approved by the local council, so I had to stay at their hotel. For context, Turkmenistan is also one of the toughest countries to get into, and this was post-pandemic, so even their biggest hotel that used to house dignitaries was also empty and dusty. I fell asleep after video calling my boyfriend. I was awoken with my duvet lifted from one edge, bringing half of it diagonally midair and almost wavy, all while hearing chants by a male voice in my left ear in a language I didn't understand. It was so fast and rough. I tried reciting all the prayers/Quranic verses I could. I was born Muslim, but I don't practice anymore, and it stopped for a short second, only to begin again with almost a mocking laughter in between the chants. At the same time, I could feel my left hand fingers being pulled repeatedly. It ended as the sun rose. I immediately called my friend, who was 3 hours ahead in time zone, to just debrief and process what just happened. Told this to some friends and local colleagues, and yes, they theorized some regional jinns. Of course, I checked out of there that morning and moved into a staff boarding house. Most terrifying experience of my life.
I don't believe in paranormal activity, but my grandparents' house is considered by many to be extremely haunted. It's part of a tour of haunted houses in the LA area and according to legend was part of the inspiration for American Horror Story. There are tons of stories, but the one I experienced myself was when I was living there as a child. I was about 6 years old and my older sister was 12 and we shared a room. My mom had decorated our bedside table with an antique telephone that didn't work and was not plugged in. My sister and I were asleep and for some reason we both woke up at the same time and turned to face each other. I remember feeling an extreme feeling of dread. Then the phone rang in between us. We locked eyes and both hid under our blankets till it stopped ringing. We both thought it was a dream because we didn't say anything for years about it. Then one day she was talking about it and we realized we had had the exact same experience. There are so many more stories, but that's the only one I experienced directly. My dad would have laughed at you if you told him you saw a ghost, until he did. He used to work late hours as a mechanic in a building that used to be a machine shop in the 20s or 30s. It was 2+ stories high, and the owner had built an apartment into it and lived there. The apartment was built on top of the parts room and phone salesman's room. It was at one end of the shop. There were stairs leading up to the entrance to the apartment, and a small bathroom right at the door at the entrance to the stairs. One night Dad is working after midnight, and he hears this loud banging. He looks up to the source of the noise, and sees the door to the apartment is open, as is the door to the bathroom. He goes up and looks, and the toilet seat is raising itself up and then slamming down. Dad watches a while, and then goes back to turning wrenches. The racket keeps up, so he just turns his radio up louder and ignores it. A week or so later he's working after midnight again, and out of the corner of his eye notices some gray, human-sized, misty thing floating across the shop floor. He watches it, not looking directly at it, for a bit, and it stops at one of the vehicle lifts. It starts playing with the lift, making it go up and down. Dad T.Yen looks directly at it, and it disappears. It showed up many more nights, mostly just wandering, occasionally playing with the lifts. Often when Dad left, he would leave a part out that he was going to work on. For instance, he had disassembled a water pump and was waiting for a rebuild kit to come in so he could repair it. But when he came back in the following day, the part was put back together again. One time he left an alternator on his workbench, and when he came back in the next day it was neatly disassembled. After talking with his co-workers and the owner, he found out they all had similar experiences. Also, there was a dim, back warehouse in the place where the owner stored some old cars for parts. I started going back there one day, just to explore, and immediately had a cold, don't go in there feeling. I went and got the shop dog to join me, an incredibly smart German shepherd, and went back. The dog refused to go in. It whimpered a bit, it growled a bit, and it slunk away. I asked the owner about it, he just smiled and said, "Yeah, don't go back there." Not me, but a security guard I employed when I ran a dispensary. She showed me the video, in fact she sent it to me and I still have it on my phone. It's a camera mounted in her young daughter's room. She's playing on her bed, which suddenly slides away from the wall about a foot. The daughter then jumps off the bed and runs out of the room to tell her mom. Later, the daughter randomly got up, walked towards and out the front door while the mom was calling after her. Daughter snapped out of it once mom made physical contact. Daughter had no memory of how she got outside. So, security guard calls a priest who literally goes by and tries to do like an exorcism on the apartment or whatever. About a week later, an electrical outlet behind a couch that she never used caught fire and the whole apartment building burnt down. I'm usually a pretty big skeptic, but I don't know how to explain the video. My fiancé at the time and I went to visit my dad. He had just bought a property built in the 1800s as a place to eventually modernize and sell. It was still in great shape and he invited us to stay there for the weekend instead of bothering with a hotel. We arrived and tired from our drive, pretty quickly found the master bed and bathroom to get ready for bed. While using the restroom I noticed some cold drafts and heard some rhythmic pacing-like sounds coming from the wooden floors. I brushed the cold off without thought at the time and assumed my fiancé was just looking around room, even though the walking sound was more like a boot than a foot with socks hitting the floor. At any rate, we both went to bed and fell asleep pretty quickly. At some point, my fiancé is nudging me in the side, "Sweetheart, sweetheart." She is whispering but has urgency in her voice. I open my eyes and my heart and blood went cold for a second. There is a faint white figure standing there, just looking at us at the foot of the bed. We both saw it as clear as day. What was even more jarring is that same draftiness I felt before was back. The figure had a feminine essence and somehow a 1800s look. Fiancé and I held hands under the covers, just sort of both awkwardly caught off guard. The thing we both remember now aside from being a bit petrified is that what didn't sense any hostility or malice, just a good 10 minutes of holy crap. The figure stayed relatively still, just sort of shifting her head back and forth like you would while looking at an item at a sale or something interesting. Then as suddenly as everything started, the figure just went away. The rest of the time there we noticed other odd sounds and slept downstairs in the living room, all lights on. My dad also had a Corvette stored in the carriage house, but my fiancé insisted there was a bad energy, so we never went in and took it out for a spin. My older sister's old flat had a lot of weird issues. She had it exorcised twice. Turned out someone died in the house, as well as someone was murdered on the doorstep. Her BF would come in from work, and would feel like someone punched him in the back of the head, on more than one occasion. You'd hear him shout in pain as he came in the door. My then 18-month-old niece was lying next to my sister trying to have a nap, and my sister could hear her daughter giggling, and saying, "Stop, I go sleep now," and trying to play with an invisible figure. One night, I was staying over, and had a terrible nightmare that a demon was trying to kill me, and I screamed at it to go off, before fighting it off. The next morning, my sister comes into the living room really groggy, and tells me she had a horrible nightmare around 1 in the morning, about a demon trying to kill her. My nightmare was exactly the same time as hers.
When I was in my 20s, I was severely addicted to heroin. I was homeless, so a friend of my mom's let me crash in her empty unit in a building that once functioned as her apartment and hair salon. It was a storefront in a trendy downtown neighborhood in an old, yet updated building. The front of the building held the salon chairs in a row up front and small bedroom with a bathroom in the back. I brought a mattress inside and got my blankets and headed down for rest in the back bedroom. I woke up around 4 a.m. to use the restroom and had the overwhelming sensation I wasn't alone. I can't explain it. It wasn't blurred by the drugs. I felt it in my spirit. I figured it was because I woke up in a new space and shrugged it off. I went back to the bed and adjusted my eyes to the darkness, and I started seeing shadows move on the ceiling. I kept rubbing my eyes and doubting myself. I figured I was just flipping out because I was sobered up now, scared and alone. This went on the next couple nights. Odd, creepy feelings in this place, especially being watched. Odd shadows on the ceiling, but I was able to get high, sleep, and not deal with most of it. I still felt uneasy though. But when you have a free place to lay your head, have heat, water, and do your drugs in peace in, you place that ahead of everything else. One evening, I came back after dancing at a club to support my pitiful habit. I was exhausted, for the most part pretty sober, and ready to settle down. I showered, tucked into the bed, and was scrolling mindlessly when these weird slapping noises started in the salon room. Sounded like someone was slapping the hardwood flooring. It took every ounce of courage to peek around that corner out into the storefront of chairs. The noise stopped as soon as I got to the doorway. I walked into the salon chair area and noticed an old cable cord coming out of the floor. This was in the area the noise was coming from. I get a terrible gut feeling, and I knew well I couldn't handle it if this cable starts moving in front of me, so I fly to the bed and jump in. I was shaking to death. I contemplated running past that room to the back door and to my car. I knew I'd have to put on more layers, grab shoes since it was freezing but sounded too time-consuming. I thought of calling 911 and having them help me. I even had paraphernalia in there too. I didn't give a damn. I was willing sleep in the winter cold in my vehicle with no gas in it. The slapping starts again, and then I realize it's definitely that damn cord. Had to be. The sounds made sense for it. It felt like was antagonizing me. I sat there shivering on that stupid mattress listening, head under the blanket, trying to make sense of what is happening. Did someone break in? No. I feel something in here not human, I know it. Then it stops and it's silence for a good 30 seconds. I just knew in my mind it was making its way in the back bedroom I was in. I feel like it felt me out a few days and was making its move. It was time. All of the sudden I felt heaviness in the space between myself and the wall, like someone leaning over me, looking. I knew it was threatening. My insides told me. My fight or flight is kicking in now. I heard, right in my face, a low growling. I have chills now telling it. It was evil. Pure anger. I flew up screaming like a banshee fighting the air and ran out the back door to my car and cried my eyes out. I made a friend get my things with me. I can't explain how a presence feels, but your soul feels it. High or not. I never suffered hallucinations on opiates. ever. This was something. I'm also happy to report I've been sober 10 years now. I have 4 wonderful kids. I'm a wife and I have become an addictions RN. Smiley face.
My mom, for my entire life, said that when she died she was going to haunt us. She was a strange cat, and she went through life believing she was a medium and could see ghosts. Growing up in that, you'd think I thought I had the coolest, kookiest mom ever, but she did it to the point it was embarrassing and it turned my brother and I into huge skeptics. When our mom would say that when she crossed over, she'd send us a sign, we naturally said, "Yeah, okay, how will we know it's you, then?" Her response was always, "You'll just know." Fast forward to 2015. My mom dies on the anniversary of this huge house fire she was in as a teen. Growing up, she always talked about the fire, and clearly it left an impression on her. 24 hours after she dies, it's 1 a.m., and my spouse and I are asleep in our apartment. Suddenly we wake up to the sound of a smoke alarm. It's exactly as scary as it is in movies, let me tell you. We wake up and jump into the living room where the alarm is, and instead of being greeted by smoke and fire, it's cold, so cold. It's January in New England in a crappy old multifamily house, so of course it's cold. But there was one smoke detector just going off by itself. My spouse goes to press the button to stop it, it doesn't. Again and again. Eventually he takes out the batteries and I swear to you, that alarm went off for another 3 to 5 seconds, which is an eternity for something with no battery even if you count for residual discharge. It was the weirdest thing. A few months later my brother and I are talking about mom and her ways, and I ask him if anything weird happened to him after mom died. And he said that the night after she died, his TV kept turning on and off by itself. To the point he'd go to bed, the TV would turn on, and he'd have to get up and shut it off a few times. Around the same time as my smoke alarm situation. It's so strange now, as a somewhat rehabbed skeptic. I just know that was my mom giving us the sign she always said she would. I still don't know if I really believe in ghosts, but I believe in whatever that was. I live in the house my late brother used to own. We moved in after he had moved into his dad's house following my brother's dad's, passing. He was going to fix it up to sell then move back to his old house, where my fiancé and I currently live. We were just going to rent it until we could close on a different house. It was a win-slash-win for both my brother and I. About a year after we had moved in and my brother moved out to his dad's house, my brother decided he had faced enough and decided his own life at his dad's old house. My fiancé and I then purchased my brother's old house to keep it in the family. Over the next couple months following his passing we noticed a few times things were strange, like a light would be on we were both certain was off when we left, or the office door would be slightly open when my fiancé and I rarely ever go in there. A few months passed with a couple of those strange happenings we passed off as, we must have forgotten. Then one night I was finishing brushing my teeth and getting ready for bed in the bathroom, and my fiancé was already laying down in the bedroom. We were yelling jokes at each other from across the hall. My fiancé made a joke that reminded me of my brother and I yelled, "You're lucky, brother's name isn't here, he'd get you for that one," and suddenly the bedroom light flicked on. My fiancé kind of nervously laughed and said, "Haha, real funny, where's the remote?" And I poked my head into the bedroom and pointed at the remote that was sitting across the room on my bedside table. My fiancé was really uncomfortable after that. I won't lie, I was too at the time, but the light has come on a few more times over the last few years. Maybe it's a bad wire, or a bad ceiling fan, I don't know. I'm not a believer of the supernatural really, but I can't explain it. And if these things really are possible, then I'm just happy to know it means my brother is still around messing with me. When I was left home alone, I'd hear thumps, noises, and feel a horrible prescience to a point I would cry and scream for my parents. I couldn't move off of the sofa and enjoy any time I had alone, because it felt like I wasn't actually alone. I heard someone crawling on all fours down the stairs, stomping near the pet cages, walking around our bedrooms. It was disgusting, and I'd still have to recover for about half an hour when my family got back each time. One time it turned my radio on and started playing a very specific song that I'd never heard before. I used to question it. Was it friendly? Was it a person, or at least, shaped like one? Was it going to peek around the corner and stare at me? At one point I even thought it was a man, a toddler, or a mutated child my age that was using our house as a hiding spot. One evening, my nose just started frantically bleeding. Being the weird kid I was, I left a handprint on the wall from it, next to a cupboard I highly suspected the thing would use as a hiding spot. Decorative purposes? I honestly couldn't tell you. What I can say though is that I wasn't expecting another one to appear next to it a week or so later. It was also in blood, way smaller, but in blood. That's when I kind of thought there could actually be someone, or something, stalking me. I've always wondered if it's a specific spirit or curse, but no prevail. Neither of the handprints were mentioned. I tried to show it to my sister who was convinced she did it, but her hand was far too small. Whatever it was, I hope it's not watching me now. So I was living with my ex-go in Kentucky, near the mountains. And about twice a week she would go outside with her family, sit on the porch in the dead of night, and just keep watch. I finally asked her what was going on by the third time, and it was, to keep the wending and the like away. Now, fast forward about 5 months, her family goes on a trip to visit relatives, she goes along and I stay cut. I didn't really mesh with her family, and since they'll be gone a few days, they ask me to put out some candles on the balcony overnight, since they won't be able to. I say sure, and I forgot to do it. Until I woke up around 2 a.m. to a very loud scream, and red eyes at our second-story bedroom window. I immediately shat myself and rushed to start lighting candles on the screened porch, turning on all the lights as I go. I swear to God, I saw something rushing back into the tree line as I started lighting the candles. I grew up in a very old house in the UK, I'm talking 1500s old. This house was opposite a really old church, graveyard and war memorial. Paranormal things happened all the time throughout all of my childhood, so much that I would become desensitized to things like footsteps, whispers, doors opening/closing. The small spooky things used to scare me as a child, but as I became a teenager those things would be more of an inconvenience, and instead of fear, I'd feel more annoyed, and thus began the weird passive-aggressive relationship between me and the ghosts of my house. I think that the ghosts loved scaring me, but they couldn't anymore, so they really upped their game. About 3 times a week the lights in the house wouldn't work. 3 different electricians told us that nothing was wrong with our lights. The lights would also miraculously work when the sparks came. I wasn't a fan of being mugged off by ghosts. They also started waiting for me to walk towards doors and reach for the handles before slamming the doors just before I could open them. This would make me jump and I could tell they'd enjoy it. So I started kicking doors shut very dramatically before opening them to take away their satisfaction and saying something like, "Saved you a job." Then they would start moving things on tables in front of me, only when I was alone, typical. It was always things like glasses and mugs, so I'd be worried about them smashing on the floor, so I'd rush to catch them. I think they'd enjoy watching me lunge for the objects. So I started using only plastic cups. They'd knock the cups off the table and I'd just watch, uncaused, and say something like, "Pooh big man," sarcastically. They really began to up their game and started locking doors/rattling doors loudly. I ended up carrying my keys around my house at all times to unlock doors, and punching rattling doors and shouting profanities. Unfortunately I and the ghosts back and forth couldn't last forever, and I eventually had to move to be closer to work. The week before I left things got crazy. Out of respect I would act scared at everything as a sort of last hurrah. It was weird having such a weird relationship with something paranormal for so long, then leaving. I sometimes think about the house and wonder how it's doing with the new family in there. I hope it got some good scares. camping at a friend's family property with a group of friends. They had a huge dingy shop full of old tools and old furniture that was super creepy. Dirt floor, clown paintings in the loft, not even kidding. We stayed up late drinking by the fire and I was the last one awake. Went to go pee on the side of the shop and stood about 5 feet away looking inside through the window. There was a fluorescent light on and I noticed what looked like a piece of paper or dollar kind of floating around. I thought it was a moth at first, but it was moving in a very flowing figure-8 patterns that were very rhythmic. It reminded me of dangling a carrot. I watched it for maybe 20 seconds, which felt like forever. Then it quickly floated back to the corner of the shop where it was dark. There was also a wood chair near the corner that added to the creepiness. Could have been a moth though. I sat back down by the fire to finish my beer and have a smoke. No one else was awake, so I played Robot Unicorn Attack 2 on my phone for a while. I noticed my friend Mark pop out of his tent to pee, and then go back in to go to sleep. I decided sleep sounded good, so I went to my tent and fell asleep. The next morning, we were having breakfast and Mark said, "I saw you guys sitting by the fire super late. How late did you stay up?" I told him I was probably 2 or 3 a.m. Then he said, "Who was up with you?" I told him I was the last man standing. He said, "I got up to pee and saw you on your phone and 2 people over your shoulder watching you play." He said one person looked bigger, so he thought it was one of our friends, who were a bigger dude. He said the other person was taller and skinny, but none of us are noticeably tall or skinny. Freaked me out. We still camp at that property once a year, but I don't go in the shop, and I go to sleep whenever my wife decides she's tired.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.